You are listening to The Art of Sales. Everyone sells every day, and this is your source for conversational, real-world sales and prospecting methods that you are comfortable using and that get results. You'll help people buy instead of pushing them into being sold. Here's your host, Art Subcheck.
Today, I am honored to have who I consider to be a living legend in the world of sales. In fact, I have a copy of his first book, The Closers, right here on my desk, and the published date was 1980, which I bought 2 years before I graduated college, was already working in sales jobs, and it was very influential in my early successes. Our guest today is Ben Gay III. Ben was the #1 salesperson in every organization in which he has worked. At age 25, he was president of what was then the world's largest direct sales network marketing company. And having been personally trained by fellow sales legends J. Douglas Edwards, Dr. Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, William Penpatrick, Zig Ziglar, and many other sales giants. One of the most famous, popular, and powerful sales trainers in the world, Ben now writes and publishes and produces the Closers series of books and audios and videos, newsletters, teletrainings, live seminars, and a series that is considered to be the foundation of professional selling. Ben was the founder and is the current executive director of the National Association of Professional Salespeople. And Ben and his lovely wife, Gigi, live near Lake Tahoe in the little northern California town of Placerville, California, where the California Gold Rush began. Ben, welcome.
Thank you very much, Art. An honor to be with you. I've admired your work for many years and sort of surprised we haven't crossed paths. David Yoho, a great sales trainer and primarily in the home improvement business, etc., came up to me one day in a hotel lobby and he said, "Ben, a pleasure to meet you." And I didn't recognize him, but I knew the voice immediately. So he has sort of an Earl Nightingale type voice. And we started swapping notes. We had done seminars together. I spoke maybe on a Monday, he spoke on a Wednesday, whatever. And in 40 years of cross-pollinating, we had never met. So you sort of fall in that category. I followed you and your work and liked what you were doing and supported what you've been doing for a long time. It's an honor to finally meet you.
Well, that means so much coming from you, because as the guests are going to find out here, you've had such a long and illustrious career, and you've touched millions of people. All right, well, let's jump into things here. You've got so much to share, but I always like to start out by asking our guests how they got into sales. So let's go way back. What was your first paid sales job?
Paid, I won a bicycle selling Krispy Kreme donuts when I was about 10 years old. I was raised in a sales family. All of my aunts and uncles, everybody owned their own business, and they were all in selling. So I sort of gravitated into it. My first job where I made, actually for my age, quite a bit of money was mowing lawns at age 14. But in Atlanta in the summer, I quickly discovered manual labor was not my specialty. So as I went to park the lawnmower for the last time one day, my father said, "Okay, you're not warming to this. Let me tell you how you do it. You sell the jobs, you inspect the jobs and collect the money, have your friends do the jobs, and you split the money." I said, "They won't work for that." He said, "Here's the second secret. You tell the people that there is no set price. They're to pay you what they think it's worth when you're done." Well, the money collected instantly doubled and tripled, and I gave half of it to my friends who did the work. And if not the first summer, by the second summer, I had 25 kids working for me. And in the growing season was probably making as much money as many of the adults in the neighborhood. So that was sort of the start, and then a few jobs here and there, and then I went to work for Macy's, became their youngest buyer, but I did that by becoming their top salesperson in the Atlanta store. It was called Davison's at the time. From there, I was recruited by one of the salesmen who called on me, George Friesen, to work for him as a manufacturer's rep. And then I drifted into my father's business. He was a food broker, and did that for a while. And then one day, September 15th, 1965, I saw a small ad in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution said, if you know anything about marketing plans, want to make more money, dial this number. Well, I need to make more money. I was putting a wife through nursing school on not a whole lot of money at the time. And so I dialed the number, went into a phone booth. I thought it was a phone booth. It was a rocket ship. Closed the door. It turned out it was a hatch. Punched in the number in the ad. Turned out that was the launch code, and called the offices in Atlanta of Holiday Magic Cosmetics. An hour or two later, I was in the business. A year and a half later, I was president of the company, and then had won part of that was winning a national sales contest, year-long national sales contest, where I beat my good friend who also joined the business that day in the same meeting, Zig Ziglar. Zig was 18 years older, but he'd never had a big payday, and he and I joined that same business along with my business partner together in the same meeting. So I used to, until Zig died, I used to love when within earshot of him, people would say, how do you know Zig Ziglar? And I said, he worked for me. Well, that was true a year or so after we started, but in the beginning we started together. So I've always been in selling, literally since probably 10, making money at 14, and I've never been away from it. Still sell today. People at my advanced age, some people think I'm retired and so on. If I'm not writing a book for myself or somebody else, or standing in front of a seminar teaching what I teach, then I'm selling. I made several sales this morning before we got on the phone.
So much to unpack here. Tell us a little bit more about working with Zig back then.
I walked in having answered the ad, and I began interviewing the guy on the phone. Hi, I'm Ben Gay with Brown Gay Food Brokerage Company, and it's, you're lucky I called. And I began questioning him, and he stopped me, and he said, Mr. Gay, I'm not the man standing in a phone booth answering want ads. Where are you? And I told him where I was on Peachtree Street in Atlanta. He said, good news, you're only about 2 blocks from my office, 1447 West Peachtree Suite 300. Be standing in front of my desk in 10 minutes or never call this number again. And he slammed down the phone. For your younger viewers, we used to slam down phones. We didn't just punch buttons. And so I went skidding in with a minute or two to spare, and introduced myself, and then turned around. There was this curly-headed guy sitting on the sofa waiting to go into the same meeting. We thought we were at a one-on-one interview. It was actually an opportunity meeting, but it had only 3 attendees, Zig, me, and my partner. And so I turned to the guy, and I said, hi, I'm Ben Gay. And he laughed. He said, Ben Gay, and he did the Ben Gay jokes. I'm sort of used to that. And when he got through, I said, what's your name? And he said, Zig Ziglar. I said, with a name like Zig Ziglar, you're laughing at Ben Gay? And he laughed, and we became buddies.
What a great story. So you've accomplished so much, and we've only talked about when you were working for somebody else, but you've been in the speaking and training business for so long. How did you get into that?
I started being semi-successful in the Atlanta organization rather quickly, and so like many people, you may have had an experience like this. One Saturday morning at the sales session, Bill Dempsey, the guy who recruited me in the business, said, go up front and tell them how you're doing it. And shaking like a leaf, I went to the front of the room. I didn't know public speaking was in my future. I wasn't doing the opportunity meetings yet. I was still just bringing people and recruiting them. So I went to the front of the room, did rather well. And he invited me back the next week and the next week and so on. And I became sort of a sales trainer. And then one day, Zig came down from Columbia, South Carolina to visit or recruit or something. I don't know why he was in town, but he was. And he worked for about an hour. I worked the other 5 hours. He told funny Zig stories. I taught sales training. And I'm standing at the front of the room talking to somebody, and I look in the back, and Bill Dempsey pulls an envelope out of his coat pocket, hands it to Zig, who puts it in his coat pocket, and they shake hands. I didn't know you could be paid for giving a talk. I just thought it was something you did. It got over your fear, and it was fun. And I didn't know Zig had been paid, but just on a hunch, I followed him out of the meeting room, and there was a coffee shop in the building. I said, Zig, before you get away, let's have a cup of coffee, which shows what a salesman I am. I don't drink coffee. I don't care for it. But I figure that's what you do in a coffee shop. So we went in, and I said, Zig, just to keep Bill honest, and I took a chance. I said, how much did he pay you? He said, I don't know. Let me see. And he opened up the envelope. He said, $300. Now, this is 1966 or late 65. I said, oh, really? He said, what did he pay you? And I said, well, I don't have the check yet, but that's what I agreed to also. I repeat, I didn't know you could get paid for giving a talk. But I had just given my last free talk, thanks to Zig, and a $300 check.
That is one of the best getting into speaking stories I've ever heard. So the people you've worked with and some who have worked for you reads like a who's who of personal development and sales. So, of course, you got Zig. I mean, my gosh, Napoleon Hill, Doctors Norman Vincent Peale, Maxwell Maltz, Robert Schuller, W. Clement Stone, Og Mandino. Amazing. I got to know, who was the best salesperson out of all of them?
Salesperson, because most of the people you named technically weren't salespeople. Robert Schuller was. I mean, he stood on top of a snack bar in a drive-in theater and started the Crystal Cathedral, the Hour of Power, and so on. You got to be good at selling to do that. But technically, the people you named, Zig was the only commissioned get up in the morning, go sell something salesperson. So I guess he would be the best of the ones you named. The best salesperson I ever personally worked with was James H. Rucker Jr., Jimmy Rucker, who was my high school running buddy, joined the business with me. He had no idea he was good at selling. He also worked for my father, but we were just retail, detail salespeople calling on grocery stores. And we got into the business where suddenly there was some big money involved, and Rucker, it was like a duck who falls into a pond, a young duck, and starts swimming. He knew he was born to be a duck. Rucker was born to be a salesperson. He was the best I ever worked with. He didn't make the most money. He didn't make as much money as H. Ross Perot, and he and I made money, but we had to cut it in half. If it was based on strict income, Zig might have won that year-long contest because he didn't have to split his. But the gross volume, we beat him. But Rucker was probably the best. I hope he sees or hears this someday. He will be honored to know that I still say that and think it.
What did he do that made him the best?
Well, in the Closers Part 2, there's a chapter in the back called Sales Infiltration. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit today. But
yes,
that could be dedicated to Jimmy Rucker. Rucker, when a salesperson approaches a person, the defenses go up, and the salesperson is getting ready to do their thing, and the customer's getting ready to do their thing, and so on. With Rucker, that never happened. He would approach people, and all of a sudden they were laughing and giggling and just having a great old time. There was never any of that conflict. So that was probably when I first started realizing that there was something else going on. Rucker, by the way, I was the front man. I was sort of the star of the two in front of the room, because Jimmy was a horrible sales trainer. And the reason is he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what he did that was so unique. And I said, well, Jimmy, you got to get up and tell them what you do. And he said, well, I just shake their hand, smile, tell them what we're doing. And I said, no, there's more to it than that. He said, I don't know what to tell you.
So, I think there's a good lesson there. All great people don't make the best managers or trainers.
Right. Absolutely.
I saw another name on your list, and that was Charlie Manson, that you had the opportunity to work with. And it can't be the Charlie Manson.
Well, it is the Charlie Manson. I don't know if work with is the right term, but I was teaching my People Builders class at San Quentin State Prison. I went in every Friday night at 6 and did 12 hours, sort of scared straight in reverse from 6 to 6, and usually had a couple of hundred inmates. It was a 12-week program, but a couple hundred inmates in the room any given night. One night I came in and Lieutenant Wooster said, Ben, I've got somebody. He was our sort of inside sponsor. and also a graduate of People Builders. He said, I've got somebody who wants to meet you. And I said, well, tell him to come to the class. He said, well, this one can't. I said, why is that? Death row people couldn't come. I knew that. But he said, well, and he pointed this area we were standing in, this beautiful little grassy area that they show to visitors so you won't think San Quentin's a hard place, is one of the walls of that area is the front wall of the adjustment center, which is sort of death row junior. That's where you go if you really shouldn't be out in the general population, but technically you're not on death row. Manson was, but his sentence was overturned when everybody in California's got theirs overturned. So he said, he's right up there, probably looking at us right now through that window on the end. It's Charlie Manson. And I said, and he wants to meet with me, but he can't come down here. Yes. I said, all right, set it up. So I met with him 3 times, each time for almost exactly 3 hours. I tell you that because of when I would come in and I wanted to be out of his cell before the count took place. Because if you're in a cell and the count doesn't clear, you remain in the cell till it does, even though you can't say, oh, excuse me, officer, I'm a guest. So exactly 3 hours, 3 different times. A little side note, I hadn't thought of this in a while. I walk into his cell. It was a 2-bunk cell, but he stayed by himself. Charlie didn't play well with other people, and nobody wanted to room with him. So he used the top bunk as sort of his shelf. He had some clothing up there and personalized toiletries and so on. And one book, the only book in his cell, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I looked at it and I said,
a little bit late for that, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, actually not, because I said, what an interesting choice. I thought maybe he was going to try and reform himself now. And I said, what an interesting choice of a book. And he said, it's my only one. And I said, well, I see that. I said, how does it play into the Charlie Manson story? He said, I could not have built the family without it. So you can take a gun and rob a bank, or you can take a gun and save your family from some tragedy, pending tragedy. You can take what's in How to Win Friends and Influence People and build the Manson family or a huge public company and everything in between.
Tell us what he was really like. What kind of things did you talk about over 9 hours?
Mainly it was, he wanted to know a lot about what I did, and we discovered that there were some similarities. And I'm not saying that flippantly or in any evil way, but, moving a group of people from this position to that position uses some techniques, and they were quite similar in some ways. What I wanted to know was, where did you go off the rails? And he was raised in the California penal system from age 12 on. He just died a few months ago at age 80. From 12 on, he was never on the streets more than a year or 2 before he was back in for something and so on. Why did you do that? And the answer was he didn't know anything else to do. He was by the time I knew him, he had a swastika cut in his head and he had the long straggly hair. There are pictures of him looking like a hip little dude. Haircut and all. There's a picture, if you look around the internet, you can find of him shaking hands with President Truman at the White House, because he was in a thing called Boys Nation, sort of like, I don't really know much about it or anything, but sort of like the Boys Club on steroids. And he and some group of them won the right or earned the right to go to the White House and meet President Truman. That doesn't make him a good guy or a bad guy. I'm just saying things are never as they appear. And then I've seen the ladies he was with interviewed. There were a few hanging outside San Quentin when I was coming and going. And I talked to them a few times, and they just worshiped him. He was good looking, funny, charismatic. When Charlie looked at you in a small cell, we were never more than 3 or 4 feet apart. Frequently our knees were touching. I was sitting on a chair, he was sitting on the edge of his bunk. When he looked at you, you had the feeling that the gaze went in your eyes and out the back of your head. I mean, really mesmerizing. I've told many people over the years, I'm so glad I didn't meet Charlie Manson when I was 17 or 18. Let's say I had come to San Francisco trying to find myself or whatever they were doing in the flower era. I'm really glad I didn't meet him. I might have been in Sharon Tate's home with him. Tex Watson, who's now a minister and I think has reformed, came from a well-to-do family, and he had an education. He wound up in the Tate home and in the LaBlanca home stabbing people. You never know.
So Charlie was the ultimate salesperson.
He may have been, maybe I should have answered your question differently. The best salesperson I ever worked with was not Jimmy Rucker, it was Charlie Manson.
So in all those 9 hours, were you ever scared?
No, he wasn't physically imposing at all. He was a little guy. He reminded me sort of in height of Sammy Davis Jr. Had this big booming voice, but he was a little, when I'd watch Sammy perform, I'd think, where's that coming from? And Charlie Manson was a little bitty guy. He was not physically imposing at all. When the guard walked me down there, and the guard knew, the adjustment center guard knew about my program, saw it, had probably been in the class a few times, so he knew that I knew the game. And he never even asked me, are you going to be okay? He opened the cell, said, Charlie, this is Mr. Gay. I walked in, he locked the cell behind me, and I said, come back and get me before the count. And he didn't ask, are you okay, or anything. Nobody checked on me. In fact, in all the times we were together, Charlie and I were sitting there having a semi-intelligent conversation, and I heard the keys jingling. When a guard is walking the tier and he wants you to know he's coming, he or she now, he lets his keys jingle. If he doesn't want you to know, he holds them, and suddenly he's in front of your cell before you knew he was going to be there. I heard the keys jingling. So did Charlie. Charlie said, excuse me, jumped up off the bunk, ran over to the front of his cell, and went, booga, 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 and jumped up and down like the crazy person you see when he was being interviewed by Geraldo Rivera or whoever. They got the fake Charlie. And the guard said something like, hey, Charlie, how are you? And just kept going. Charlie came over and sat down. He said, I'm sorry. He said, they just love that.
Oh, well, I just learned about as much about prison as I hope I ever know. So
good.
Let's get into selling and sales skills here. So we've both been around for a while, and what are your thoughts when you see someone on LinkedIn or somewhere else make a blanket general statement that everything in sales has changed?
Well, first of all, you just hit on one of my pet peeves. I hate blanket statements. Always, never, everyone, yes, and so on. So that's what I think about blanket statements in general. What I think about everything's changed, I look at myself like I'm a shepherd. In the old days, I had a shepherd. It was a car, and I had to get in it and go make calls, and then on opportunity meeting night, pick them up or drive to the grocery store, whatever I was doing at the time. The sheepdogs are much better today, but when the salesperson through the social media, internet, and so on, but when the salesperson and the customer, client, prospect meet, nothing's changed, not since the days of the Yankee peddler. They want to know what's in it for me, and they want to know if they like and trust you. And then they want to know the value of your products or services. So almost nothing's changed, except with a click of a button, I can now reach 1,000 people. I don't have to get in my car in Atlanta and drive to Chattanooga on the chance that I will be able to meet the person I was going to meet. So it's just time compression. Art, if we had had social media when I was running Holiday Magic, we were doing $1 million a day in 1967 dollars. It's about $3.5 billion now, with people getting in cars, picking up their prospects, bringing them to the hotel, and so on, driving around, wasting enormous amounts of time. If we had had the social media of today, then you would now be talking to the benevolent dictator of the world.
And I tell this to people all the time that human beings, I mean, the human brain has not changed, and it's still humans talking to humans.
Right.
So when I see things like nobody picks up the phone anymore, and people are already 95% through the buying process by the time they contact you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's true if they're placing an order. Most of the people that I talk to on the phone, for instance, if it's an incoming call, and I always take, if I'm available, I'm first in line on the phone bank. I always take a call if I'm available and not deeply involved in a writing project or something. When they call, they've already made up their mind 90% of the time to buy a book. By the time they hang up, they probably have all of my material, about 86% of the time, and may have booked me to do a $9,500 seminar plus expenses, airfare, hotel, etc. So yes, it's true, on the internet frequently they come to you sort of bound and gagged to buy the least important thing you're selling. That's where things take off.
Agreed. It has made the marketing part of our job a lot easier. And I find that there are too many people they have the title of salesperson, but they're really marketers. They're not picking up the phone. They're hoping that people are going to contact them without putting in the activity, the hard activity, doing the research, making the phone call, creating the interest, engaging somebody in a sales conversation.
Absolutely.
So that's one of my pet peeves as well.
Here's a thing that made me mad this morning, and it does every morning. I walk in the office. I said, how do we do on the website and the internet, so on. And we had, I forget the number, but 50 some odd book orders, 1 book, 2 books. Some were for all the closers parts 1, 2, and 3. And I said, damn. And someone said, well, aren't you happy? I said, no, let's say 52. That's 52 people I didn't get to talk to. So I would rather run them through my system, and instead of 1 book they buy 5 books. Instead of 5 books they buy me and a seminar, and so on. So the good news is if you're an order taker, the internet's wonderful, and I'm very happy. 50 some odd books, fantastic. But it would have been a lot more if I had talked to them.
So a term you had mentioned earlier, sales infiltration. You mentioned that in your book, The Closers Part 2. Explain that for us.
Okay. It's the best thing I've ever written about selling. I sincerely believe it's probably the best thing ever written about selling. It's Sales Infiltration, Closers Part 2. Starts on page 257. It was inspired reading. Now, in the back of my writing, in the back of my head is Rucker, who didn't know what he did. He just did it. That was part of it. The training of sitting for hours on end with Dr. Napoleon Hill and him teaching me how life worked and so on. So I'm not saying it was all one blinding flash of new wisdom, but it was sort of like it all came together. There was a knock on my office door. I buzzed the buzzer, and in comes a guy with a tool belt on, and I said, hi, what can I do for you? Somebody had sent him up, so I figured it was okay. And he said, well, I'm here to check your filtration system. And I had a legal pad out, and I was starting to write the last chapter in The Closers Part 2. I used to write them on legal pads. And so I said, what did you say? He said, I'm here to check the filtration system. And I jumped up, shook his hand, said, I'm very sorry, but you're going to have to come back tomorrow. Walked him through the door, shut it, and locked the door behind him because the light had come on. That's what Rucker did. That's what Dr. Hill was trying to teach me. That's what Zig did. Zig wasn't a hardcore, I say this, you say this salesperson. He was a personality. He'd made a better lounge act than a salesperson because he was just funnier than heck and charming. So I sat down, and in one, it's 40 some odd pages in type. I don't remember how many, if I used up a whole legal pad or whatever, but in one, I never got up, never went to the bathroom, never did anything but write from top to bottom Sales Infiltration, where I explained what these mystical people I'd worked with were really doing. And among the things they were really doing was they overcame, the salesman is team A. Team B is the prospect or customer, and we're at war. What the sales infiltrators, we didn't know that term at the time, but what they were doing was greeting the person and quickly establishing team C, which was made up 50-50 of the prospect and the salesperson. And they together, not one person versus the other, they together acknowledge the problem that they had or had just been created, and they together solved it. They became a trusted advisor almost instantly. Most sales are made, as you know, in the first made or heavily influenced in the first 10 to 15 seconds. So that's when you become a sales infiltrator. And I work with a lot of sales organizations that are, I say this, you say this, I say this. In a famous vacuum cleaner company that I work with, it's a joke. I've turned it into a joke, but it used to be their philosophy. The sales presentation is not over until you have the money or the police have been called. Well, I was raised by cultured human beings who were very successful, had money, and I was raised in the South. I'm a Southern gentleman. I'm very proud of it. If you tell me to get out of your house, I'm gone. You know, I'll reach down and grab my briefcase on the way to the door, but something has gone radically wrong, and staying 1 second longer than I'm welcome is just unthinkable to me. So I had to figure out a way not to be asked to leave the house. Quick story. I was doing some work with one of the largest pre-need cemetery business, but selling pre-need cremation plots, coffins, whatever. Not a real fun business. It's harder to get. If you can get in the house, the sale's relatively easy, but most people don't want to invite you into their home to discuss their impending death. So that's the hard part, is getting in. Anyway,
everybody's a prospect, though, that's for sure.
Yeah, one day I'm going out to test some scripts I'd written for them. I never just write scripts and hand it to them. I go test them. My neighbors hate me. If they see me coming up the sidewalk, they know I'm there to pretend sell them something. And so anyway, I'm going out to test this script. I wrote the script for getting the appointment. I had 5 appointments set thanks to my script. Now I'm going to see him, and the sales manager says, Ben, would you mind letting this guy ride along with you? He's new to the business. I said, no, of course not. So he rides along. I said, here's the only rule. After you go, hi, how are you, and so on, shut up. I don't need your help. I don't want you unless I ask you a direct question that you can answer yes or no, don't say anything. And he says, okay, I got it. So we go into 5 homes. I didn't write it down. I couldn't swear to this, but as best I recall, I sold 3 or 4 of them on the spot, 1 later that afternoon, and the next one the next day, 5 out of 5. So anyway, we're going back to the office. I'm driving him back, and I said, well, did you learn anything today? He said, oh yeah, and it's an honor to be with you, but I would have learned a lot more if you hadn't had 5 lay-down sales. So I pulled over to the curb. I said, let me explain something to you. 3 of the sales I made while you were still scratching your butt, hoping they would give you a free drink. It happens quicker and for entirely different reasons than you think. So that's an example of selling the way I sell and the way sales infiltrators sell. If your viewers, listeners do nothing else, and I've already been paid for any book you might buy, I get paid when they get printed. So I got nothing in the game unless you later buy more. But get your hands on the Closers Part 2, and if you read nothing else but Sales Infiltration on page 257, then read that. It will literally change your life. It is exactly what I do, what Jimmy Rucker did, what Zig Ziglar did, and what most of the great salespeople I've worked with around the world over the years do, those that stuck. Because if you don't, the sales business wears you out. It literally can grind you down. Then you wind up on a used car lot in a cheap sport coat with that deer in the headlights look in your eye, wondering what went wrong. Well, those of us who use sales infiltration and or variations of it, we don't go through that. I look forward to coming into the office in the morning. Selling is not a grind. It's fun. I get to talk to nice people like you. It's a win-win-win.
There's certainly a lot of people that have gotten out of the business. Can you share with us just a couple little tips or hints on how to do sales infiltration successfully?
Well, read the book and practice. Sales Infiltration, I've told people, picture a puzzle that your parents used to give you. It came in a box, and all the pieces were jumbled up. The good news is, unless your family was vindictive and didn't like you, it came in a box, and on the cover of the box was a picture of what the puzzle was supposed to look like when you got done. Sales Infiltration is the picture on the puzzle box. So that's that. Now, to give you an overview of selling, I've found that 85% of all the problems in selling go away instantly if you sell a quality product or service. Yugos, the old car, don't qualify under that system. A quality product or service that is competitively priced, doesn't have to be the cheapest, but competitively priced, where you can explain by adding value the difference between the price they might have had in their mind and the price of what you're selling, and you spend your days communicating with qualified people, qualified financially, personally, geographically, income-wise, what they do for a living, whatever you're selling, the qualifications change a bit, but that are qualified. That leaves 15%. In that 15%, become a person of class, quality, and substance, with the ability to tastefully project that you are a person of class, quality, and substance. My closing rate, as best I can tell, I couldn't prove this in a court, but I'm close. My closing rate of high-ticket items over the years, I've been in professional high-level selling for 52 years now, is about 86%. When somebody says to me they're not going to buy, I'm surprised, because with what I know and the way I execute it, I expect you to buy. And we cover, in Sales Infiltration, we cover all the goofy stuff up front. I tell them, and in the book I teach you how. I operate on a straight, Mr. Prospect, I operate on a straight basis. That means I'll be straight with you, you be straight with me. Fair enough? Oh, yeah. So that means that when I make the offer, I'm here to sell you something. When I make my offer, you don't get to say, you have to check with your brother-in-law in Cleveland who's an accountant, because you and I know you don't have a brother-in-law. He doesn't live in Cleveland, and he's not an accountant. So I start humorously. We laugh and we knock all those down. So when we get to the end, and I use my magic close on you because I have positioned myself where I can, when we get to the end, you can't use all that stuff. If you say, I got to talk to my fill in the blank, I go, no, we covered that up front. And among the other rules that I establish in the beginning, which relaxes them, is I promise you I will treat you fairly, squarely, decently by the rules. Fair enough?
A lot of this has to, and of course, I encourage people go ahead and get the book, Closers Part 2. Actually, get all of them, and then if you get Ben on the phone, you'll probably wind up booking him for a seminar. But so really, I mean, a lot of this has to do with likability, setting the frame, setting the tone right at the beginning, removing the tension, any perception they might have of being pressured, just that whole salesperson perception that so many people have.
Absolutely. It's being likable, trustworthy, and you have to have the skills. It's not an accident that I can move you from point A to point B. That's skill. But I grease the skids by establishing the rules, tastefully projecting that I'm a person of class, quality, and substance, and that I'm selling a quality product that's competitively priced, and I think you're qualified or we wouldn't be here.
So I think you referred to your magic close. So what is your magic closing question, or your favorite closing question or statement?
Well, first of all, I listen. Dr. Hill encouraged me to be what was said of Nelson Mandela, a dynamic listener. I listen intently, and that includes body language, because you may not have to get to my magic close. When you're ready to buy, I'm ready. And we don't have to go through the other 30 minutes I could have done. But assuming we go through the entire presentation, or I believe it's ready, and keep in mind, Sales Infiltration, I become a member of their family, they become a member of mine, we're working on a thing together, and so on. Right at the end, probably 95% of the time, I say something like this, and I say like this because the first phrase might be a word or two different based on the situation, but the magic close basically is, Art, based on what you've told me, here's what I suggest we do. I don't emphasize it that way, but Art, based on what you've told me, here's what I suggest we do. Here's what I suggest is the fill in the blank. Buy the car, get the roofing, get the siding, buy $50,000 to put in all your stores, whatever. Here's what I suggest we do, fill in the blank. Pause. Fair enough? And except for a few little minor questions here or there, clarifications, about 86% of the time, to me, they go, yeah, that's fair enough.
So to break that down, there's actually several things going on there. Based on what you said, people aren't going to argue with what they said. And
right.
If you listen carefully, you picked out their buying signals or their assumed ownership signals. And instead of pushing something, and I like to call it the recommendation, making a suggestion or a recommendation as opposed to a pitch. And what we do, you're in it together, but you're letting them make the decision. I like it. And then the fair enough question at the end, most people consider themselves to be fair and reasonable. Brilliant.
And it's hard to say no to fair enough. It's a soft question. If you have another question, you can still ask it. It's not a no. You've become buddies. Who's going to tell their best friend that they just offered them a situation that's not fair enough? And the other, I said the phrase might change. In the example I gave is, Art, based on what you've told me. Sometimes, again, based on the situation, I might say, Art, based on what we've discussed. That's about the only change. The second one is, here's what I suggest we do, blah, 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 fair enough.
Like it. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see salespeople making today, and are they different from 20, 30 years ago?
No, ever since I got in selling, they've been making the same mistake. I probably made it too, and I probably didn't recognize it in them, but I now know that the make or break points fall along this line. They're selling things they don't believe in themselves. They believe, because they hear it all the time, that salesmen are liars, cheats, and thieves. And rather than reject that and change the image of at least themselves, I'm not out to reform the sales industry or anyone's image of it. My only concern is how you relate to me, Ben Gay, and my product, whatever it may be when I'm talking to you. So they're selling things they don't believe in. They think they're hustlers. I don't know if you belong to any of the automotive groups. But, as an inside salesperson, I belong to them to many of them because I want to see what they're up to and get chances to recommend my material and so on. If I wanted to totally destroy what's left of the automobile industry, what's left of the old automobile industry, I would take if I had a way to do it, I would take every prospective customer and I would link them up with the automotive sales groups, where they could see what the salespeople are saying about them, about the industry, and so on. It makes you want to go take a shower. It's just, I'm ashamed of some of the people within the industry. And then there are the superstars. Ali Rita, a good buddy of mine, broke a 44-year-old record held by Joe Girard and sold 1,582 cars in 2017. He sold 202 cars in December of last year, himself, working 5 days a week. He's a selling machine. He doesn't say anything that's not true, and people line up literally to buy from him. You can't walk in cold. You and I could not walk into the dealership and find Ali Rita and buy from him. We'd have to have an appointment, be sent by somebody, have already bought a car from him in the past, something like that. I'm proud Ali Rita is a member of the sales industry. Many, not most, I'm not going to do one of those absolutes, many people in the sales industry are exactly what people are thinking of when they say, I hate salespeople.
One thing you said, too, that I need to reemphasize, and that's believing in your product. I always tell salespeople, you should absolutely feel that you should be charging more for what you sell, as opposed to dropping your price. You need to believe you're delivering so much more value than the price itself. And if you don't, something's wrong. You either need to change your attitude or change the company, because that's got to be there.
But something else Sales Infiltration does for you when executed properly, when you get down to they're looking at this roof or this siding or that siding or this car or that car, they say, well, what's the difference in the price? Or why, in so many words, why should I buy now from you? Because that's your job, is to get them to buy from you, not somebody else now, not at some time in the future. And if you're a good sales infiltrator, you get to answer with, you get me. I'll be here with you. You get me. This isn't hello, goodbye, see you around. The gentleman in Sales Infiltration I use as a specific example, he's now deceased, but he was a dear friend of mine. When he sold you, you bought more than you realized. He was suddenly appearing at your weddings, your funerals. He was uncle, a member of the family. And he had totally infiltrated. He told me one time, he said, sometimes I have to struggle to find time to sell because I'm attending so many other things from my current and former customers. Here's a real quick one. I know we're running out of time, but a real quick one. He attended, J. Douglas Edwards is an old friend of mine. I wrote his book for him after he died, Sales Closing Power. He went to a Doug Edwards seminar, and he said the only thing I remember from it was, and this was as he was going out to start selling this giftware stuff. He said the only thing I remember from it was, he said, never leave a home without getting 5 referrals from them. And he said, I wrote that down, and then I made my first sales call, and I asked for and got 5 referrals. And from them, some of them gave me none, some gave me 10, somebody, whatever. But the point of the story was, Art, he made, in a 40-year sales career where he made a ton of money and became a superstar, he made 1 cold call, his first one.
All referrals after that.
Everything. Referral on referral, and I just picture a big tree with lots of limbs. It all goes back to the 1 acorn, his first call.
Ben, we could talk for hours, and I do want to have you back so we can go deeper into many of these areas. But for now, what are some final suggestions that anyone in sales can use?
We've covered a lot of them: quality product, competitively priced, etc. However, you and I had discussed favorite quotes earlier. Let me give you a favorite quote. I have many. I'm surrounded by quote books, so I'm never short on a quote. But one of them that really applies to your question is Ed Danforth, who was then head of Ralston Purina, wrote many years ago. I read it somewhere, and then I later, within days, heard it in a seminar. He wrote The Common Denominator of Success. And it was, successful people do what unsuccessful people aren't willing to do, because successful people are after pleasing results, while unsuccessful people are after pleasing methods. And if I looked at any given salesperson, 80% of whom turn over every year, and dissected them, it comes down to that. They were cutting corners, skirting this, exaggerating this, doing that, doing whatever it took to get through the situation, coming in at noon, leaving at 4, etc. They're after pleasing methods, not pleasing results. Results come from action, hard work. Dr. Hill told me, I said, ask him one day, all right, let's say you drop dead right now. What are you leaving me with? He said, integrity, intense focus, dynamic action. And those 3 things are missing from almost every salesperson that fails in our industry.
Too many are looking for the easy button.
Right. I looked for it for several years, right, Art. I literally looked for it. I was confident I was looking for the magic phrase.
And you probably get these emails and calls and messages too, where people are saying, what's that one technique, or what's that one way to overcome an objection? And I think as we've demonstrated here, I was looking for the easy answer to sales infiltration, but it's an entire chapter in a book. I'm going to go back, and I actually got the book right over here, and I'm going to reread that chapter as soon as we get off of this. Ben, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. And why don't you leave us with contact information and anything else you'd like to share or offer our audience? I'd actually be disappointed if you didn't have some kind of offer.
You would. Well, first of all, I'd like to just stay in touch with anybody who cares. So you can go to my website. Don't buy anything there. Go to my website, bfg3.com. That's B as in Ben, F as in Frank, G as in Gay, the numeral 3.com. That way we can stay in touch if I have something of value. I don't bug people, but if I have something of value, that's how I communicate with people. Then, if they would like to get a deal, because I know how you are, on the material we've been discussing, the closer series, etc., I have a special place you can go where there is special pricing and free shipping, and that is stores, STORES dot ebay.com / and this is the secret, Ronzoni Books, RONZONE Books, BOOKS. Of course, run together is all one word. There, they sell my material for less than I sell it for, and ship it to you free, which I won't do either. So, and people say, how do they do that? Well, my wife's maiden name was Ronzoni. When I sell books, I have to pay for them. She sells books that she sneaks into the warehouse and steals. So she's able to sell them at a lower price. And I have yet to hire anyone who has the nerve to say, Mrs. Gay, you can't take books out of the warehouse without paying for them. So she has an unending supply.
Are you getting a commission on those books that she steals? Or how's that? Are you getting a commission on the books that she steals?
Well, I get paid when they're printed.
Okay.
My royalty is at the point of printing. So beyond that, I almost don't care, but I just find it funny that someone who can undersell me because they steal the books.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to talk offline here because I need to talk. I'm talking to my publisher right now. I'm gonna have to see how I can get that deal. You're obviously a great salesperson. Okay. All right, Ben. Thank you again so much. This has been a graduate degree in sales. I do want to have you back on again. All right, everybody else. Hey, thank you for investing your valuable sales time with us today. And if you know somebody that would also get value from this show, please send them to our show site, theartofsales.com, theartofsales.com. Until next time, go out and